Hi, I'm Steven Salerno and welcome to my studio. I'm located in New York City in Manhattan, and this tight little cramped studio space that you see, this is where I get all my work done. I've been an illustrator for many years, creating illustrations for magazines and newspapers and publishing and advertising. But I've also managed during that time to also illustrate 36 picture books for children. And today I'm going to talk to you about a special little unique project that came my way, a picture book project, actually a picture book project that entailed 5 books. And like I said, it came my way about 2.5 years ago, and I said yes to this project. And I'm going to go over to my table and show you some samples from this project and explain it to you. Okay. I think most all of you will certainly recognize these characters here. That, of course, is Madeline and the 11 other girls in the boarding house in Paris. And there's the ever watchful, towering Miss Clavel. Anyone that knows the Madeline stories knows these characters. A couple of years ago, 2.5 years ago, I got a call from the executive art director at Viking Press, which is a division of Penguin Random House. And I was asked, would I like to illustrate the next 5 Madeline picture books that they were planning at that time? And as you know, Ludwig Bemelmans is the original illustrator and author of the initial 5 classic Madeline stories that came out from 1939 to 1961. Ludwig Bemelmans died in 1962. But these 5 new stories that Viking Press is going to put out are written by John Marciano Bemelmans, who's Ludwig Bemelmans' grandson. And they wanted an illustrator who could emulate the Ludwig Bemelmans style. So they found their way to me, and my illustration career has never been about mimicking another artist's style, but in this case, because it's such a unique and special project with Madeline and Ludwig Bemelmans, I said yes to the project because I wanted to challenge myself to see how well I could do it. And going into it, I knew I could do a terrific job with it. So I took it on, and so far I've illustrated 4 of the 5 new Madeline books. 2 of them have already come out this year, or in January of this year. Love for Madeline has come out, and just this month in June, Madeline's ABCs has come out. The 5th book is still in progress right now. This is not the original artwork. This is a print. This one here, this one is from Madeline's ABCs. B is for bridge. There's Madeline, the mischievous and energetic Madeline up on the bridge. And I think Miss Clavel is having a stroke, I think. So again, with these illustrations, I put my own ego aside and my own styling preferences, and all I was trying to do was create these illustrations as if Ludwig Bemelmans himself had created them. Here, this is a detail of one of the illustrations. This is not the full scene. That's Pepito in the sailboat with Madeline. Love for Madeline just came out in January. Here's the cover. And there you can see, based on the characters created by Ludwig Bemelmans and illustrated by myself. It was and is a fun project. Like I said, I'm still working on the 5th book. There's the Madeline ABCs book, which just came out in June. So I'll just show you very quickly that, when I take on this project, of course, in the early stages. I'm doing just preliminary rough studies. This is crayon and colored pencil. This is just some rough sketches when I was working early in the project, just to start getting my feel for creating the Madeline character. Here's a crayon drawing, even more rough. When I get the manuscript, it starts out. This is the actual manuscript that I first start with, and as soon as I start reading it, I immediately start creating these little thumbnail sketches. It's visual shorthand. These thumbnail sketches are not shown to anybody. They're just crude behind-the-scenes sketches that gets me started, where I can just get down my thoughts very quickly about what I might be doing to create the illustrations. And of course, from all these thumbnails, there's tons of them, and then I do little kind of very rough storyboard sketches. And here are just some of the very crude rough sketches in the beginning. These are, again, marker and colored pencil and crayon on paper. Even though the sketches I created ink and crayon on paper, for this Madeline project, the final illustrations, which I created, of course, based on my sketches once they were approved by the publisher and the Ludwig Bemelmans estate. When I created the final illustrations, I created them all digitally, and that's so that I could have flexibility, so that when I was drawing the lines, when I'm creating the drawings, doing these lines, doing them digitally, it allowed me to be able to draw and redraw the lines over and over again until I got them just right. And I knew going into this project that if I had tried to do this project traditionally with ink on paper, I probably couldn't have done it, and I certainly couldn't have done it within the time frame deadline of the project. So that's the Madeline project. Now let's get to, well, let me just show a little bit more. This spectacular looking scene, very bright and colorful, is one of the spreads from Madeline's Seasons, which is the fourth book that's going to come out. The fourth book, Madeline's Seasons, will probably not be released until 2023. So here's an advanced sneak peek. Here are all 12 girls, along with Miss Clavel and the dog Genevieve. And they're in their red outfits, enjoying the splendor of the fall colors in Paris. There's Paris in the background. Here's Madeline in the front. Let's take a look at Miss Clavel again a little bit closer. And if there are some of you out there who are real experts of all the original classic Madeline books by Ludwig Bemelmans, you might kind of recognize this roof line that I devised in the foreground. That roof line comes from one of the early Madeline books called Madeline and the Bad Hat. In that book, there's a scene where Pepito is sitting on a rooftop flying a kite, and that's that rooftop. So I created kind of a nod to one of the earlier Bemelman books. And let's see, what do I have here right at hand? This is a scene. This is one of the spreads from the first book that's out, Love from Madeline, which just was released in January of 2022. Love from Madeline is the first book in the series of 5 new Madeline books coming out. And this is a scene where they've been out all day, the 12 girls and Miss Clavel, and they're heading back now to their old house covered in vines, which is the boarding school. And there they all are in their 2 straight lines, marching back home. And there's Madeline looking over her shoulder, giving the entire audience kind of a knowing glance. And Genevieve the dog, and then again a bit of a glimpse of Paris and the Eiffel Tower in the background and the gardens in the front. And here's a quick look at, this is a detail, this is not the full illustration, this is just a detail from the, let's see, the 3rd book out, Madeline's Numbers. That probably will not come out until, let's see, that will come out in maybe September of 2022, I think. I've kind of lost track of the release dates of these books. So there they are at the fair. Oh, no, I'm sorry. This book is from, Madeline's Numbers. You can see there's a number 2 up there at the top. And there's the 2 girls in the Ferris wheel pod. That's Madeline on the left and one of her fellow mates at the boarding school. And then there's Pepito all by himself. And this is a little peek. Again, this is not the full illustration scene. This is just a detail, but this is from Madeline's ABC's book. And this is, well, it's going to go in up here, but it's P for Paris. And there are all the girls in their white outfits, and they're just strolling through Paris with Miss Clavel, going through one of the arches. And this is an existing arch in Paris, and now I've forgotten the name of this specific arch. And there's some fellow Parisians there, peripherally on the side. And, well, I have a little time left here. I'm going to show you just maybe a couple more of the little very rough sketches that precedes, of course, creating all the final illustrations. And these are a couple of sketches that never made it as becoming final illustrations in any of the books. And just to repeat, all the sketches, all the preliminary sketches and studies that I did were crayon and pencil and ink on paper. There's Madeline helping the plumber. All these sketches were paper and ink and crayon on paper, but when it came time to create the final illustrations, as I had said previously, I created them all digitally in Photoshop, so that I could have the flexibility when I was drawing the lines of being able to draw and redraw the lines over and over and over again and adjust them until I got them just right. So it helped to ensure me that I was properly emulating the Ludwig Bembelmann's classic illustration style. Okay, in my brief presentation of this Madeline project, I was showing you the sketches that I created with crayon and ink on paper. All the sketches and studies were created traditionally on paper. But then I was saying how when it came to creating the final illustrations, I made the decision to create the final illustrations all digitally because I needed that flexibility. So I wanted to just very quickly show you that process. Let me bring up, okay, in the middle of the screen here now. This is one of the early sketches. Bring it up a little bit bigger. This is one of the very early rough sketches, and it shows a bit of a close-up scene of some of the girls in the Paris boarding house getting ready for bed, and we see Madeline on the end and Miss Clavel in the doorway. This was a very, very early sketch when everything was still open to discussion as to what the images would be. So from this rough sketch, it went a step further. Let's see. Excuse me here. Okay, here we go. So the next stage sketch looked like this. Once it had been decided upon that I would be doing this scene of all of the girls getting ready for bed and Miss Clavel coming to the doorway and looking in upon them. Now this sketch was based on the previous one that you just saw, which was done on paper with crayon and ink, etc. But this version sketch, this was created digitally. So all the color that you see in the line work, it was drawn in Photoshop. And then it was decided that this was a go, that this was the scene that I was going to illustrate. However, at the very last minute, I decided, well, Madeline shouldn't be on the left-hand side of the spread. She should be over on the right-hand side of the spread. So when it came to creating the final art, which I'm going to show you here next. So what I'm bringing up on the screen now, this is actually the final illustration that was created in Photoshop. And you can see immediately that when creating the final art, I had flopped the sketch so that now Madeline is on the right-hand side, so that the beam of light is coming from the left to the right, and we see Madeline with one eye open. Let me get my cursor here. So over on the right-hand side, you can see here all the various layers that went into creating this illustration as I created it digitally. But I'm going to start clicking off all the layers. You'll see I'll go down the column. I'm clicking off all the layers. And then this bottom layer says sketch, but it's clicked off. So I'm going to click the sketch on. So this is how I will create the final illustration. I'll bring in the sketch. I'll bring in my sketch as the bottom layer, but then I will, in the opacity adjuster here, I will lighten it. Whoops, too much. I will make the sketch very, very faint. You can see now that you can barely see the characters in the sketch, the girls on the left and the right, and Miss Clavel in the center. So I have faded the sketch, and then I will start right away with, I don't remember where I started, whether I started drawing the girls or with Miss Clavel, but I'll click on her layer, and then I'm going to zoom in here. So here's Miss Clavel, and I'm going to click off Miss Clavel. So there's the sketch underneath. So I will use that as my guide, but then using one of the brush tools in Photoshop that I felt best kind of simulated the pen ink line that Ludwig Bemelmans used to create his drawings and his magnificent original illustrations from his books, from all the original books that came out from 1939 through 1961. So let me get my cursor. So here's the line work that I did to create my new drawings. And again, you can see the sketch underneath. I'm going to remove the sketch. See, there's the sketch underneath, very faint. And there's Miss Clavel. So you can see I'm not copying my sketch. I'm using it as a guide underneath to draw Miss Clavel, but you can see I've adjusted her face, I've made it thinner, and I've changed her expression a little bit. So there's Miss Clavel, and then I'll do the same thing with all 12 of the girls here. Of course, when I click on the layer for the girls, they're just all going to appear at once, but as I'm drawing the final illustration, I'm drawing, you know, one girl at a time. So here's Madeline down in the bottom, and you can still see that the sketch, the layer of the sketch is still showing through, and it's faint, and I'm using that as my guide to draw Madeline. Let me click off the sketch, and I'll click the sketch back on, and then here's Madeline. So there's the sketch of Madeline, and then there's the drawing of Madeline. And you can see, again, I'm not just copying the sketch underneath. I'm using it as a guide. I'm kind of aesthetically making modifications and adjustments. And then, of course, the glories of Photoshop is that everything is flexible. So, for example, you know, as I'm drawing, if I felt like, you know, this independent drawing I had created of just Madeline was out of position, you know, I can move it, I can adjust it. Whereas if I had drawn this with ink on paper, what you put down kind of stays there. And for me to meet the deadline with these Madeline drawings, doing it in Photoshop gave me the flexibility to adjust things very quickly. So there's the layer with all the girls, and of course on that same layer was the window in the background. And let's see, what else have we got here? So I have Miss Clavel and the girls all in. So then once all that's in position, and I still have the sketch layer showing, but very faintly, then I can start painting in on separate layers the background. Here's the first layer of color I created, again using Photoshop brushes, various brushes that will simulate kind of a watercolor effect. So there's the first layer of color I dropped in, or rather painted in, and then another layer that is more of a like a streaky kind of texture that I created. And then here's some color on Miss Clavel that I put in, and the carpet in the center of the room and the curtains. Let's just zoom in on that so you can see the color that I put in. And you can see that, you know, the edge of it here is kind of looking like a scumbling kind of technique with gouache or watercolor. And I continue with more layers of color Here's kind of creating darker shadows in the room, and pushing that even further, even darker hue of blue. And kind of where I'm using my cursor, you can see that as I'm painting it, I'm doing it as if it's, well, as I'm digitally drawing it, I am essentially painting, but I'm just doing it with not a real paintbrush, but a digital paintbrush. And getting it even darker. And then here comes in the pop of yellow. This is the doorway, the light coming from the doorway that's streaking across the room and illuminating Madeline in that lower right hand corner. And I believe that is it. This illustration is rather simple to create. I did it in probably about a dozen different layers. When I create illustrations that are more complex for some of the nonfiction picture books I've illustrated, I might have as many as 40 layers. So let's zoom in and take a look at the finished illustration. Here's Madeline, the only one that seems to be awake. And then we see all 12 of the other girls. And Miss Clavel in the center. And they're all off to dreamland. And that's a brief peek at how I created the illustrations, employing the, whoops, I'm back, I jumped back to the sketch, using Photoshop for its flexibility. So this illustration is from Love for Madeline. It's the first of the 5 new Madeline books that I illustrated. The second one out is Madeline's ABCs, which came out in June of this year, 2022. The third book out will be later this fall, the Madeline's Numbers. And the fourth book, Madeline's Seasons, will, I believe, come out in the spring of 2023. And the fifth book is still in the works. And you can go to stevensalerno.com to see all of the books that I've illustrated. Thanks for watching.